Today we're going to try something a little different. We're doing a deep dive, a deep dive into well, you could say a little bit of an Austen mystery.
Oh.
It's her unfinished novel, The Watsons.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this one. It's always fascinating to think about what makes an unfinished work so compelling. Is it the mystery? Is it the untold story? Or is it the sort of glimpse that we get into the author's, creative process?
Yeah, it's like we get a behind the scenes look at the workshop, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly. And for this deep dive, we actually have a really good mix of sources, including a book review, a couple of YouTube videos, and even a blog post. So lots to explore. But before we jump in, can you give us a little bit of background? What exactly is The Watsons? And, why should we even care about a novel that Austen never actually finished?
Well, The Watsons is a manuscript that Austen abandoned around 1805. And, it's really interesting because it kind of offers this window into her evolving writing style, a shift towards a more stark portrayal of social realities, maybe even more so than some of her completed novels.
So it's interesting because when I think of Austen, I think of wit, I think of social satire. I don't necessarily think of bleakness.
Right, and that's what makes it so interesting. It suggests that she was kind of going in a new direction, a different tone, maybe even willing to explore some more serious themes.
Okay, well, that definitely has me intrigued. So what's the story about? What actually happens in The Watsons as far as we know?
Well, the story centers on Emma Watson, and she's forced to return to her family, her impoverished family, after being raised by wealthy relatives. So she's, thrust back into this small provincial village, and she faces a lot of pressure to marry well. But it's not just for love; it's for survival.
Yeah, that is a familiar theme in Austen's work for
Yeah.
sure. The precarious position of women in society.
Absolutely. But here it just feels more pronounced, you know,
Yeah.
more more grounded in the realities of financial struggle. It's not just about finding a suitable match. It's about avoiding, utter destitution.
Yeah, the stakes are definitely higher in this one. Okay, so let's talk about the characters. Who are some of the key players that we meet in this Austenian world?
Well, there's Emma, of course, our protagonist, and she's intelligent, she's refined, and she's really determined to not sacrifice her happiness for just financial security. She's a character who wants more than society seems willing to offer.
I like her already. She sounds like a true Austen heroine.
Yeah.
Independent and, discerning.
Yeah, definitely. And then you have her eldest sister, Elizabeth, kind-hearted but desperate to marry. She embodies that pressure that Emma is trying to resist.
I see some conflict brewing there.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can't forget the other two sisters, Penelope and Margaret. They're described as manipulative and obsessed with appearances.
Oh dear.
So they add a whole other layer of complexity to the family dynamic.
It definitely sounds like there's no shortage of drama in
Yeah.
the Watson family. But what about romantic interests? Are there any potential suitors vying for Emma's attention?
Well, there are two main contenders, and they each represent a different path for Emma. First, you have Lord Osborne, the wealthiest man around. He's smitten with Emma, but he lacks social graces.
Okay.
And then there's Mr. Howard, a pleasant but kind of underdeveloped clergyman, and some sources actually suggest that he was Austen's intended match for Emma.
The clergyman, huh?
Mhm.
That's interesting. So it seems like Austen was maybe setting up a clash here
Yeah.
between practicality and true affection. Choosing between a wealthy but unrefined suitor and a kind but financially insecure clergyman.
Exactly. It speaks to that central tension in the Watsons, this conflict between societal expectations, financial security, and personal happiness. A conflict that feels particularly poignant because the novel is unfinished.
Yeah, it's like we're left wondering which path she might have chosen.
Right. It's really fascinating to think about.
Now, before we go any further, I want to take a quick moment to remind all of our listeners that if you're enjoying our deep dive so far, don't forget to subscribe to the BookNerd podcast for more literary discussions. And if you're feeling extra generous, go ahead and leave us a review. It helps other book lovers find us and join in on the conversation.
Okay, now back to the Watsons. One question that always comes up with unfinished works is, why did the author stop writing? What are some of the theories surrounding Austen's decision to abandon this manuscript?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I mean, was it writer's block? Or was there something more to it?
Well, one theory is that Austen's own father died during the time that she was writing The Watsons. And the novel actually deals with some similar themes, like financial insecurity and the loss of a father figure. So it's possible that the personal loss was just too overwhelming for her to continue.
Yeah, that makes sense. It must have been incredibly difficult to kind of work through those emotions while also, trying to craft this fictional narrative.
Exactly. And it really makes you wonder how much of her own life kind of seeped into this particular story.
There's also another theory that maybe, Austen actually found the social realism that she was exploring in the Watsons to be a little bit too bleak.
Yeah.
And maybe she just decided to shift her focus. Maybe she had other stories she was more eager to tell.
That's a good point. Austen is known for her wit, her social satire, but the Watsons seems to delve into a darker territory.
Right, right.
Maybe it just wasn't the right fit for her at that moment.
Yeah. But even though it's unfinished, there's got to be value in it.
Oh, yeah.
What makes the Watsons so unique and worth exploring?
Well, one of the key takeaways is that we see Austen experimenting with a new style.
Right.
So she's moving away from some of the more whimsical romantic elements of her earlier works, and she's kind of going towards this more grounded, realistic portrayal of society. And the characters feel more complex, their struggles more relatable, and the overall tone is just more mature.
So it's like we're watching her kind of develop her craft, pushing the boundaries of her own storytelling abilities.
Exactly.
What other thought-provoking aspects stand out to you about this work?
I think it's really interesting how the Watsons kind of foreshadows themes and character types that she later perfects in her completed novels. So you see glimpses of, Pride and Prejudice in the awkward but intriguing Lord Osborne. You see echoes of Mansfield Park in the themes of social isolation. And there are even hints of Emma, in our protagonist's sharp wit and her social observations.
It's like we're seeing these seeds of her future masterpieces planted right here.
Yeah.
In this unfinished work.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even the greatest writers, they start somewhere, they experiment, they evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources mentioned some pretty intriguing details about the characters and the plot.
Yeah.
Anything particularly captivating jump out at you?
There's this charming little anecdote about Emma dancing with Lord Osborne's nephew, Charles.
Oh.
He's only 10 years old. But this seemingly insignificant act kind of brings her to the attention of Mr. Howard, and it suggests that even these small moments can have, unforeseen consequences.
Like that butterfly effect.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And it's a good reminder that, social interactions, even the mundane ones, can just ripple outwards in ways that we don't expect.
I love that. What else? What else caught your eye?
There's also a theory that Lord Osborne was actually going to propose to Emma.
Really?
But she was going to reject him.
Wow.
Which would have been very, defiant of societal expectations.
Especially in her position.
Especially in her position, yeah. But it speaks to her independent spirit.
I love that she would just, choose her own path.
Exactly.
Even if it means going against the grain. Now, there were also some hints about a darker side to the Watson family dynamic.
Right.
Anything that you can tell us about that?
Well, one detail that reveals kind of the complexities of the family is this tragic story about Elizabeth, the eldest sister, and her lost love. And it suggests that there's some real jealousy and betrayal going on, which adds a whole other layer of intrigue to the story.
Yeah, that's intense. It really adds a whole new dimension to the family dynamics. Now, before we go too much further, I do want to remind our listeners one more time. If you're enjoying our deep dive, be sure to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast. We love having you all along for these literary adventures. And we always appreciate it when you take a moment to leave a review and share your thoughts.
No, where were we? Oh, right. So what really intrigues me about the Watsons is just the potential that Austen created. Even though it's just fragments, it's still so tantalizing.
Yeah, it's true. It's like we're left with this cliffhanger, dying to know how she would have resolved all of these complex storylines. I mean, what do you think she might have done with Emma's romantic dilemma? Would she have chosen love or practicality or?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we can only speculate. But knowing Austen, I think she probably would have found a way to kind of blend the two.
Okay.
Maybe Mr. Howard would have revealed some hidden depths or some unexpected prospects, allowing Emma to kind of find both love and financial security. Or maybe she would have found a way to just create her own path, using her intelligence and her resourcefulness to kind of secure her own future.
I like both of those possibilities.
Yeah.
It would be so satisfying to see her, defy expectations and find happiness on her own terms.
And it would be a testament to Austen's skill as a writer,
Right.
to create these characters who are relatable and also aspirational.
It really is fascinating to consider all the different paths that she could have taken.
Yeah.
Like she's given us a glimpse into this world full of possibilities, and then she just kind of invites us to imagine the rest.
And that's part of what makes it, despite being a fragment, it's so captivating.
It sparks our curiosity.
Yeah, and it encourages us to engage with her creative process in a more active way.
It really is. It's a reminder that even unfinished works can offer these valuable insights into an author's mind. And it inspires just endless speculation and interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think those unanswered questions are the most thought-provoking of all.
Yeah, I think you're right. They linger, long after we've finished reading. And it kind of invites us to revisit the story and explore it from different angles.
Speaking of revisiting the story, there was that one detail that really stuck with me, the tragic tale of Elizabeth Watson and her lost love. According to the blog post, her happiness was ruined by her own sister, Penelope.
Yeah, that was it's a heartbreaking example of how these family dynamics can be really destructive.
Yeah. And it raises the question, how would Austen have handled such a complex and sensitive issue if she'd continued the novel?
It's hard to say. But knowing Austen, I think she would have approached it with a lot of nuance, a lot of compassion.
Right.
She might have explored what was motivating Penelope. Maybe she was insecure or maybe she felt like she had to preserve herself somehow.
Right, because Austen was so good at creating these complex characters who were both flawed and sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine her using this storyline to examine the, jealousy, power dynamics within families,
Right.
and the long-lasting consequences of betrayal.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a reminder that even when there's, heartache and disappointment, there's always this possibility of redemption, and growth.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a message that really resonates even centuries later.
Yeah. But for now, we'll have to pause our deep dive into the Watsons.
But don't worry, listeners. We'll be back soon with part 2 of this episode.
Yeah, we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating literary puzzle. Welcome back to our exploration of the Watsons. Last time we were talking about the characters, the themes, and that whole mystery of why Austen just decided to abandon this manuscript.
Right, and we ended on that kind of cliffhanger of, how would Austen have resolved Emma's romantic dilemma? I mean, Lord Osborne, Mr. Howard,
Yeah.
it really is, it speaks to that tension between what society expects and what we want for ourselves, personal happiness.
Absolutely. And one of the YouTube videos, A Day of Small Things, actually has this theory that Lord Osborne was totally going to propose, but that Emma was going to turn him down flat.
Wow. To reject the wealthiest man in the area, especially when, you're in a tough spot financially, that's a bold move for a woman in her position. It speaks to her character. But, okay, so do the sources give us anything about how Austen might have actually reconciled those two things, like wanting love, but also needing that financial security?
Well, we don't know for sure, but Austen was really good at those surprising plot twists.
Right.
And crafting these nuanced characters. Maybe Mr. Howard, even though he's not wealthy, maybe he has something else going for him. The blog post, Pseudo-Intellectual Reviews, talks about how Austen often rewarded her heroines for being good people. So maybe Mr. Howard, maybe he comes from a good family, or he has some hidden talent that could bring in more money.
You know what? That's a great point. It wouldn't be out of character for her to have a character that seems ordinary and then surprised they end up exceeding expectations. It would also fit with how she always kind of liked to shake up the social order, showing that that worth isn't always tied to money.
Yeah.
Maybe Mr. Howard, even though we don't know much about him, maybe he had the potential for that.
Exactly. And remember, the book review talked about how the Watsons seem to be going in this direction of really digging into social dynamics in a more complex way. So maybe she was setting things up for Mr. Howard to kind of be the dark horse, the one who actually makes more sense for Emma than Lord Osborne.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's unfinished, but it gives us so much to think about and talk about. It really gets the imagination going. What other possibilities could there have been?
Well, another way she could have gone was to have Emma figure things out for herself, Combine love and money by taking the initiative. Remember how Elizabeth was thinking about becoming a teacher?
Yeah.
So maybe Emma, with her brains and her education, maybe she finds a way to use those skills to make a living and still follow her heart.
Okay, that's really interesting thought. It shows how strong and resourceful she is, qualities we love in Austen's heroines. It also kind of pushes back against what women were supposed to do back then. It's like she's saying, maybe you can find fulfillment outside of getting married and climbing the social ladder.
Exactly. It fits with how Austen was always, subtly pushing those boundaries, showing how society limits women. I mean, even if she did have Emma end up with Mr. Howard, she could have used all that uncertainty to show Emma's strength, and how independent she is.
It's amazing to me how, even though it's just a fragment, the Watson still has all these themes and characters that are so well developed.
Yeah.
It really shows Austen's talent.
Yeah.
And how she could capture, relationships and the pressures of society.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about the sisters a lot.
Right.
What about the brothers? Robert is supposed to be kind of cold and judgmental.
Yeah.
And Sam, well, he's barely there. What do you think they would have added to this story?
Well, family is huge in a lot of Austen's books. Mm-hmm. How siblings get along, the role of the parents, what's expected of the kids, those are all big themes for her.
Yeah, and even in this little bit that we have of the Watsons, we see that playing out, right?
Yeah. So with Robert being so judgmental, I bet that would have caused some real tension with Emma, especially since she's so, free-spirited. And then Sam, since we don't know much about him, maybe he would have been a support system for Emma. Or who knows, maybe even a romantic interest, which would make things even more complicated.
Oh, wow, yeah. I mean, would Robert have come around, seen how strong Emma is and kind of softened up? And would Sam have stepped up and become more important, maybe even shaken things up in the family?
I mean, who knows? That's what's so fun about these unfinished works. You get to fill in the blanks. Imagine those missing chapters. It makes you appreciate what we do have,
It's true. And it reminds us that even the best writers, sometimes they don't get to finish everything. Life gets in the way. You lose inspiration. Sometimes the creative process just goes off in a different direction.
Yeah, it makes Austen seem more real, Like even these great writers, they face challenges too. And it makes you appreciate what they did finish. All that work, all that dedication.
Absolutely. Speaking of appreciating Austen's work, if you're loving this deep dive into the Watsons, don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast. We've got so many more literary discussions coming up. And if you're feeling really generous, leave us a review. Let us know what you think. It helps us connect with other book lovers all over the world.
So back to the Watsons. One thing that really got to me was that story about Elizabeth and her lost love, the one her sister Penelope sabotaged. It's just sad, It shows how family can be loving, but also so messy and full of betrayal.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking how jealousy and selfishness can just, ruin even the closest relationships. How do you think Austen would have dealt with the aftermath of all that? Would Elizabeth ever forgive Penelope? Would Penelope regret what she did?
I don't know, but it shows how talented Austen was to create these stories that are so layered and emotional, even when they're unfinished. She touches on these themes that, they're universal: love, loss, betrayal, family.
It's also a reminder that even when things are bad, there's always a chance for things to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Elizabeth, even though she was hurt, maybe she would have found happiness in a different way. Not through romance, but through finding herself in her own strength.
That's a nice thought. It shows how Austen's work, it gives us hope,
Yeah.
Even when things are tough. Okay, so thinking about all this, that whole thing with Elizabeth and her lost love.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what it was like for women back then. All that pressure to marry well, not having many choices, social status being so important.
Yeah.
So Penelope, yeah, she was looking out for herself. But maybe she also felt like she had no other option. Like she had to secure her own future, even if it meant hurting her sister.
It makes you realize that Austen's novels, even the ones that seem light and funny, they often have this subtle way of critiquing how society worked back then.
Yeah.
And the power dynamics, you know? And it seems like the Watsons, even though it's unfinished, it's doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And that's probably why people still love her books, even now. Those themes, love, family, societal pressure, they're still relevant today. One thing I noticed about Lord Osborne was how awkward he was. He wasn't very smooth socially.
Yeah.
He kind of reminds me of Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, you're right. They're both rich and powerful, but also kind of standoffish at first. And they both seem to underestimate the women they're interested in. Which leads to all these, misunderstandings and misjudgments.
Exactly. Maybe Austen was using the Watsons to try out ideas and characters that she would later, perfect in her other books. It's like we're seeing her work, her genius developing.
Yeah, and it makes you appreciate her finished novels even more,
Yeah.
all that work that went into them. And it shows why it's so interesting to look at unfinished work. It gives you a whole different perspective.
Like we're peeking behind the curtain and seeing how she worked, trying different things, getting better and better.
Makes you wonder what else is out there. What other unfinished stories are hidden away, waiting to be discovered.
That's exciting to think about. And it shows how powerful Austen's work is. It still captivates us all these years later. But for now, we're going to have to pause our deep dive into the Watsons.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon for the final part of this episode.
Yeah, we'll wrap things up and leave you with some things to think about. Welcome back to the Book Nook podcast. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the Watsons. It's been so interesting looking at the characters and the plot and trying to figure out why Austen never finished it.
Right, and now we want to kind of shift gears a little bit and hear from you, the listeners.
Yeah.
What really stuck with you from the Watsons? What are you thinking about after our discussion?
Yeah, what are your big takeaways?
What stood out to you about this unfinished work? Was it Emma and how independent she is? The whole will she, won't she with the romance? Or maybe just getting to see how Austen worked?
Maybe you're thinking about the darker stuff with the family, the struggle between what society expects and what makes you happy, or how Austen kind of sneaks in social commentary.
Whatever it is, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment. Find us on social media. Keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. So as we're closing the book on the Watsons, so to speak, let's leave you with one last thing to chew on. We've talked about how this book feels different for Austen, like she's moving towards this realness and showing the hard stuff women faced back then.
Right, and it makes you wonder what she would have done if she'd finished it. I mean, she planned for Emma to marry Mr. Howard, the clergyman, who wasn't rich. So how would she have made that work? Emma wanting love and security.
It really shows how limited women's options were back then. Marriage, for a lot of them, that was the only way to be financially okay. But Austen's heroines, they always want more than that. They want a real connection, someone who gets them.
And Emma, she grew up with nice things. She's not just looking for someone to pay the bills. She wants a partner who can keep up with her, who appreciates her mind.
Exactly. So how do you solve that? Well, maybe, like we said before, Mr. Howard had more going for him than we realize.
Right, maybe a good family or some hidden talent that could make him more successful. Austen loved to surprise us with characters like that.
But what if she was thinking of something even more unexpected? What if Emma found happiness outside of marriage? What if she used her smarts and figured out a way to be independent, to create her own life?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that would be different. Not the typical happy ending we see in romances. But it would make sense for Austen, how she'd like to kind of poke fun at society's rules, and how she wrote such complex women.
It shows that Austen, even back then, was ahead of her time, questioning the way things were, showing us the different sides of being human.
And that's why we still love her books, right? They make us think,
They
they challenge us, and they're still relevant today.
So, as we say goodbye to the Watsons, think about this. What if Emma chose a different path? One that said no to what society expected and embraced a life on her own terms.
It's something to think about. And it shows how Austen, even with an unfinished story, can still make us think and question things.
It reminds us that even stories that aren't finished can still have meaning, and they make us engage with literature in a more active way, using our imagination.
Absolutely. If you're as fascinated by the Watsons as we are, there's a link in the episode description where you can buy a copy. Check out this unfinished masterpiece for yourself.
And if you're ready for more bookish adventures, subscribe to the Book Nook podcast. We've got more deep dives coming your way.
We also love hearing from you, so leave us a review and tell us what you thought of this episode.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Jane Austen's The Watsons. Hopefully you have a new appreciation for her brilliance, and maybe you'll go searching for those hidden gems in the world of literature.
Until next time, happy reading.
And thanks for listening to the Book Nook podcast.